Okay, so an access appraisal is where myself as an access consultant will appraise the plans for a building. So generally that happens during the design of a construction project where I'll be supplied with a lot of plans and drawings, and then I'll appraise those for access for disabled people. And that process will involve obviously looking at plans and using measuring tools to identify dimensions, look at things like stairs and lifts, toilets, parking, all of these little design issues, and try and make them as accessible as possible so that they can be addressed at the earliest stage where it's least costly and where it's easiest to make a building accessible. Because if you get plans and drawings appraised early, then you can make adjustments to drawings simply rather than having the actual building assessed after it's been constructed, where you might have to make an adjustment to something and it's going to be a lot more expensive to move a wall or put a door in, or I don't know, add additional car parking spaces. At the end of the day, it's a lot easier to change the lines on a drawing than to change a wall in a constructed building. So it's all about reducing cost, making those adjustments early enough so that the resulting constructed building will be as accessible as possible. It does extend beyond the walls of the architecture itself, because we'll consider how the building will be used by disabled people, and that's not just physical disability, it's about sensory disability in terms of how somebody with a visual impairment or a hearing impairment will appreciate the space and navigate around the space. So it'll not only recommend adjustments to dimensions and layout, but also put forward recommendations for how the building might be decorated, what colour the walls might be, what materials you will use for the flooring, how visible the reception is if somebody comes up to the front entrance. Looking beyond that, outside, you'd be looking at landscaping. What about the gradients approaching the building? Are they comfortable for somebody who, in a wheelchair, can a visually impaired person cross the road outside? Is there tactile paving available outside, or is there sufficiently marked pedestrian routes through the car park? Is the connection to the nearest public transport suitable and close enough? Also, is the signage designed on site pointing in the right direction? So there's lots of elements that go into making a building accessible, and all of these things will be appraised throughout the design process. Initially at a earliest design process where you're looking at the concept design and how that works in broad strokes, and then gradually going through the various stages as the detailed and technical things get ironed out towards the finishes and the signage and that sort of thing. So it's all encompassing, taking in the journey that someone has on public transport or by road or as a pedestrian to get to the building, and then how the building is entered and used. Well, there's always risks for non-compliance. All construction projects have planning requirements that they have to meet, depending on where they're built, how they're funded. As an absolute minimum, they have to meet British building regulations. So that generally performs a baseline provides a baseline standard for buildings to be appraised to, for the drawings to be appraised to. Beyond that, some projects, particularly in cultural venues or large public venues, will want to go a bit further than something in a commercial development, and they'll look at best practice standards like the British standard, and these can provide recommendations over and above the basic legal requirements of building regulations. But beyond that, looking further into the future, when a building's opened, the management and operatives of that building are required to meet responsibilities under the Equality Act to make reasonable adjustments to accommodate the needs of disabled people when accessing their services. So if you have an accessible building, that will always help you to meet your legal obligations under the Equality Act, which was formerly the DDA. Once a building is constructed, it moves away from an access appraisal. Access appraisal is generally desktop based, where you're looking at plans and drawings and meeting with architects and project managers, that sort of thing. When you move from that and you're doing a constructed building on site, that's an access audit, which is the same process. You will look at the journey to the building from the public transport, how somebody parks, how somebody gets in. Same point of view from someone who has a cognitive or sensory disability or a physical disability, and you would use the same sort of standards, but applied in a slightly different way depending on the fabric of the building. What's applicable for a building that's new with owners with huge resources would be completely different to something that is old or has listed or heritage or cultural constraints and is operated by an organisation with a smaller budget. So once you've moved from the desktop and the drawings into a constructed project, then it goes from an access appraisal and then becomes an access audit. Over the years, I've performed numerous access appraisals, a lot of them in the cultural sector for National Museums Liverpool, the Museum of Liverpool on the waterfront down in Liverpool. We did that one. We did the Great North Museum up here in Newcastle, Expo 2020 Dubai, a lot of work for them. Numerous smaller cultural venues. We've just done the Spanish Gallery in Bishop Auckland, which is a very interesting project. The Museum of Wales in St Fagans next in Cardiff, that was a huge project also. That was the biggest heritage lottery fund grant at the time. An access statement demonstrates how a design is going to provide access for disabled people. It can often be put in to accompany a planning submission to demonstrate how big building regulations have been met. I mean, building regulations are pretty technical in the way they're applied, but there is room in them to sometimes apply a different method that's equally accessible. So over the years, I've been asked to do lots of access statements for smaller developments where the solution in building regulations just will not fit because of the constraints of the building, because it's old, because it's listed, perhaps because the confines of the development mean that it needs to reduce a stair width or needs to make things slightly different but still meet the needs of disabled people. So in that area, an access statement is a document that will accompany a planning submission to say that that particular development has met the needs of disabled people and building regulations, but in a slightly different way. Access statements can also be a really positive message of intent. They're often called design and access statements, and there again, they'll accompany planning submissions on larger scale projects where resources are not so much of an object. Sometimes funding requires best practice access for disabled people, so an access statement will just demonstrate a commitment from the development that they will apply a higher standard of access to meet planning and funding requirements. So generally it's kind of a administrative sort of role for access statements to demonstrate the extent of access for disabled people and how that is going to be applied to a development. Well, as I've already said, they can provide a measure of mitigation for alternative compliance with building regulations and provide a demonstration that they are meeting their funding requirements, whether it might be something from the Heritage Lottery Fund or another fund that they need to include to get the project off the ground and moving. So getting an access consultant on staff to do that at an early stage would demonstrate to potential funding streams that they are serious about access and that commitment will be carried out through the project. When I'm doing an access appraisal, I always try to use a sort of visual form, so using screen grabs from the drawings and references to applicable standards to try and remove any doubt and try and really point people in the right direction as regards the specific areas that you're identifying as needing adjustments to provide better access for disabled people. Well, direct access have a wealth of experience over many years, and we have done appraisals on all sorts of projects. So we are aware of what our clients need, and we have developed a format of reporting and doing access appraisals and statements that has worked over the years, and we've been able to tune that into our clients' needs and update it in response to changing regulations and changing relevant accessible standards. Also, the access consultants at Direct Access are qualified and disabled people, which gives us a little bit of inside knowledge in how buildings may function for physical and sensory disabled people, and cognitively disabled people, of course. So I always think that disabled people themselves are the best people to ask about how a building functions, whether that's somebody who's qualified like our staff at Direct Access, or whether it's consultation with prospective building users. They'll always give better insight. So I think that's why Direct Access should be the place to go for access appraisals.